All right. Good morning. It's so great to see all of you. It's about 10 o'clock, so I thought we'd get started. There might be a few more people who come in and out, but I want to say hello. My name is Haley O'Toole. I do historical interpretation here at the Garden. I need to apologize in advance. I am suffering another symptom of holiday cheer, which is a head cold. So if the coughing or other things begin, please excuse me. I'll try to get through this and stay near the microphone so you can hear me. For those of you who are not as familiar with interpretation, our role here at the Garden is to connect all of our visitors to what they see in a very basic sense. So we're very, very fortunate to have the ability to facilitate those meaningful interactions with the public. With regard to what we do at Tower Grove House, that often is about the history of the Garden, the history of our community, how we were founded, and the like. So my job encapsulates a lot of those elements. I also, throughout the year, work on garden ground signage. We build new exhibits. We do research of new content and work to curate the artifacts that are in Tower Grove House. If you haven't been there recently, we opened a new exhibit this past year that opened a whole new section of the house, so there's constantly new things to see there that we hope bring our visitors back year after year, and Garden Glow is one of the main times that we hear our visitors join us on a yearly basis. So you are a part of that memorable experience for them. So today we'll be talking through some of our volunteer basics. Some of you might be familiar with this system, but this is an operational reminder of how we take care of volunteering at the house, what the Garden Glow situation looks like. And we'll talk a little bit about what interpretation is to familiarize you. We'll give a brief historical background and kind of go through room by room, what you'll see available to sign up for via service, what kind of content will be shared there. And then we'll have a short section about frequently asked questions. I would ask you, this presentation should go for about an hour, and then I've left 30 minutes blocked at the end for questions. If you could save your questions until the end. There's a place on the back of that quick reference booklet that you received to write things down. So I'd ask that you save that until then, and then we'll go through your questions at the end. Please don't hesitate if you need to get up and stand, walk. If you need to leave for any reason during the course of this presentation, I completely understand. I hope you are all comfortable, so let's get started. First of all, our interpretation department works within the education division. Our team operates the Tower Grove House site, as well as the Children's Garden, our plant lab, and our Brookings Interpretive Center. So again, our goal is to really provide our visitors a connection to the legacy and mission of our garden, which Henry Shaw himself established. So these spaces allow us to deliver programs with a variety of topics. We want to ensure that any information being disseminated in those respective areas provide clear connections to our visitors. That's why you'll see that information in your hand. An interpretive plan helps us ensure that all of us have the same information that we share to connect to our visitors. You'll also get to know a few of our 9 interpretation assistants that you might meet depending on what day you volunteer. I see a few of them back there. Hello, staff, hello. These people are who you are able to check in with, who you can defer to if you have questions or needs on those days that you volunteer. It's also important for me to point out the people that you can call if you have other needs before or after volunteering, feedback, ideas. We're happy to hear all of those things. Jennifer Wolf is our manager of interpretation. Many of you are familiar with her, and both her phone number and mine are listed on the back of that booklet. We're the people taking care of your needs with regard to this exhibit inside Tower Grove House. Andrea Harper, who you checked in with, is our education volunteer coordinator. Hi, Andrea. Andrea takes care of all things, especially related to service, that fun system that we use. So if you have challenges or other needs, Andrea is always happy to help you as well. Scott, who is our wonderful volunteer manager, I saw him a minute ago. Hi, Scott. He manages all the volunteers here at the garden more broadly. And so Scott is also able to help you with service, make sure you have the things that you need to feel comfortable volunteering. Hi, Scott. Nice to see you again. Lastly, I did provide the information for Jay Blair. He's our Garden Glow event manager. He's taking care of all things Garden Glow. So if you have feedback about the event itself, or if you have other questions or ideas that relate specifically to the event and I can't answer them, Jay is the person to go to. First off, it's always important to say that when we have these trainings that no one is asking you to memorize all of this information. I just handed you a bucket load of information, and I want to make sure we're clear that you do not feel obligated to memorize all of it. However, we try to provide our volunteers with more than enough information to try to feel equipped. Depending on what area of the house you choose to volunteer in, you'll become more familiar with certain information, or you'll get to know the types of questions that visitors ask in that space. We will always, in the education department, we might be biased, but we're always encouraging learning, and we want to make sure that even you as volunteers are lifelong learners. If you have questions, see things, you get things throughout the event that people want to know, we're always happy to share and try to answer those questions if we can. That being said, we also encourage all of our staff and volunteers, if they don't know the answer, to be okay with saying, I'm not certain, to a volunteer, and saying, you know, I would be happy to go find that answer for you. So again, being familiar means doing your best to be able to answer those questions that you're going to get, and being able to maintain that knowledge through that conversation that you're having with visitors. We're encouraging participatory learning. That means that we aren't in the habit of preaching or giving history lectures. We believe that learning comes through having conversations with our visitors, meeting them where they're at. Even if we're answering the most basic question over and over again, we're starting someone's path to better understanding the history of the garden, our mission of the garden, or something specifically about St. Louis history. So because of that, we do continue to encourage those conversations. Sometimes that starts with just a, hi, how you doing? Or I hope you're having a great time with your family, and can then spark something as they start to observe what they see in the space. As I mentioned earlier, despite being one of almost the furthest corner of the garden and kind of the middle point on the Garden Glow experience, many of our visitors don't ever see a staff or a volunteer until they get to Tower Grove House, which means that we are representing the garden. They're going to be asking you questions like, how late is this open? Where's the closest bathroom? Making sure you're familiar with some of that logistical information that provides comfort for our visitors is really important. You can find a lot of that information in the frequently asked questions section in the booklet that you received. Making sure that people know the boundaries of the house. We don't permit food or drink inside the house, and so making sure that people understand why we're caring for our historic spaces and what we do to make sure that we're providing a high quality experience for everyone is also helpful. We also ask that you track your engagements. Engagements are a very important part of the situation that I'll talk a little bit more about later, and making sure that you're keeping track of your own assigned schedule. You use the service system. If you're less familiar with that system, please connect with me or Andrea Harper or Scott Behan at the end of this, so that way we can make sure that you are comfortable and can assign your own shifts and take care of that online scheduling, okay? Again, acting as an ambassador for MBG is our primary goal as staff, and we hope to extend that to you as volunteers. A lot of our visitors don't know the difference between someone who is a staff or a volunteer, and because of that, we ask that you continue to be thoughtful about the diverse group of people that's coming through the house. People have all types of backgrounds and interests and want to know about very different things, and we continue to encourage you to be as friendly and welcoming and really encourage those conversations as much as you can. We have the advantage of having the home as a backdrop, which makes hospitality a little bit easier. I always approach my time in the house like I'm welcoming someone to my own home, as an extension of the garden and of our team. So we want to encourage you to continue to help our visitors manage their comfort needs, to continue to smile. Most people are having a wonderful time, and be mindful of the way that you're interacting, because it represents all of us. So our system divides our shifts between 5 and 7:30 and 7:30 to 10 o'clock. It really just depends on what you're most comfortable doing. We have some people who like to stay for the whole evening. Some people prefer later or earlier. It really depends on you, and once you have access to those service shifts, which you should after this training is complete, you should be able to see all of the shifts and sign up at your will. You'll see that the schedules will be posted for November and December. If you sign up as early as possible, that means you can get the shifts and areas of the house that you prefer. But we have a lot of people who are more than happy to do ad hoc, and we're happy to have them as well. You sign up the night before, that works too. If you do have a last-minute scheduling conflict and must cancel your shift, we encourage you to use service to do that, but you can also call us if it's short notice. If you leave me a voicemail, technology is magical, and it also sends me an email. And so I am bound to get your information. If it's a real, true emergency and you need further assistance, Jennifer Wolf's emergency cell phone number is also on the back of that booklet that can help you as well. Dress code seems so formal, but we always try to make sure that you're comfortable as you provide your service to the garden. We always encourage you to wear a identification badge. Shirts, you're welcome to wear your events t-shirt for 2019. I am unsure what the status of getting more of those shirts is, but if you already have one, you're welcome to wear it. Depending on where you are located, it's likely you could be standing for some time. Chairs are available if needed, but be prepared to be standing on your feet, so comfortable shoes are a must. Depending on where you're located, at times, if you're scheduled to be the person at the back door, you might be opening and shutting that door a million times and might need to wear your jacket. If you're upstairs, it might be kind of warm, so a t-shirt might be all you need. So please try to dress appropriately so you can be as comfortable as possible. Your badge is your parking pass. So as you see, this is our parking area. This was the parking area last year as well, if you volunteered last year. If you come here to the left side and show the parking security your badge, you should be able to park in this area. Regardless, if you come for a later shift, parking can be a bit fuller. So be prepared for that. Try to come in a timely fashion so that way you're not feeling rushed. You're able to get to the house and get comfortable at will, okay? When you arrive, we encourage you to come through the front door. The basement space where we keep where we have room to keep your personal effects, this break room that's listed here, is key card access for staff and regular Tower Grove House volunteers. We do have a card that is sitting on our desk that a staff person can direct you to, so you can go up and down at your will if you're not a regular Tower Grove House volunteer. But this is where you can store your personal effects. There is a private bathroom for volunteers and staff in that area, not open to the public. There's also water a refrigerator, a place to put a snack if you intend to stay for a long time. We do not allow food or drink on the top floors unless you bring something that has a lid. We usually just encourage water, but that time of year some people are drinking tea or coffee to stay warm. It must have a closed lid, but otherwise there is a sign-in sheet on the basement bulletin board. I usually print those once a week, so if you sign up closer to the day that you're volunteering, you might not see your name there, but your name should be represented and what area you agreed to volunteer in. At times, that can be something we forget along the way, so that should be represented there. That's someplace you can sign in, and then you pick up a clicker to track your interactions. So those interactions are really important to us. Interactions are engagements that we have with the public about some sort of educational material you're sharing. So anytime you share with one person or a group of people, you click every person you feel you made some sort of impact on. This does not include where is the bathroom or how do I get out of here, but this is meant to keep track of those really juicy moments where you feel that you really connected someone to the space. There'll be a book for you to write that number in at the end of the experience. Every night you'll kind of check out by adding those interactions to that booklet. And we really appreciate that. That's how we track your impact. We're able to say at the end of that our volunteers gave so many hours but impacted, 20,000 people or more. And that's really meaningful to us. In case of an emergency, I have to go through some of these procedures. Please notify Tower Grove House staff. That's any kind of emergency. That's a first aid emergency. All of our staff are first aid CPR trained. That's something that you see that you don't think is right. In any form or fashion, please connect with our staff. It is their job, duty, and willingness to take care of those things for you. For serious emergencies, please call 911. It's easier to use the phones that are at Tower Grove House because they can data point exactly where that is on garden grounds and come to the correct door to support somebody in a real emergency. In more specific situations like fire, the Piper Observatory, that beautiful little yellow observatory that's out there in the Victorian District, is our fire assembly point. Again, a staff person would lead those procedures if something were taking place, but knowing that information helps you be of service to our team. If you see theft or something happening, please let that occur. We do not encourage our volunteers or staff to step in. Nothing is more valuable than you. Inclement weather is the most common situation that we have to deal with. Unfortunately, that time of year, weather happens. Tower Grove House is a storm shelter, so if there were a huge storm, we could gather people into the basement. That's what's great about brick. But equally as important for you to know is that the garden monitors inclement weather as it's happening. Usually if a storm is coming, we're watching at 2 p.m., 4 p.m., and making decisions as it happens. If you don't feel comfortable for any reason at all, we do not encourage you to come. We want you to be safe and comfortable. And we try to alert our volunteers via a personal phone call. You'd receive that from either myself, Jen Wolf, Andrea Harper, someone on our education team, to make sure that you know directly that the garden or Tower Grove House is closed. Tower Grove House is special in that some of the walkways that are close to it are made from slate or other types of aggregate that can become slick with water and freezing. So sometimes there's been instances where Glow is still open, but Tower Grove House is closed because people cannot safely traverse the steps. Again, we connect with you directly if we see that you're on the schedule to make sure that you know what's going on. If you do have questions or are worried, you can always call the Glow hotline. That's always posted on our website. Our social media and website are always up to date if those types of things are happening as well. It's important for me to share that before we kind of go into some of this historical information, that history is as complicated as science. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with sharing the science wing of our mission. History can be just as complicated in that history is being discovered every day. New pieces of evidence or resources become available. Primary sources can appear and completely change how we think about what we learned previously. I'm sure everybody has experienced generationally how school is taught differently, or the things that we've learned are different from the next generation. So it's important for me to share again that it's never straightforward. There are going to be things that you may have learned in the past, if you volunteered in the past, that might be different because we've learned new things, or we better understand the context of some of that factual information. So please be patient. Please be thoughtful, and remember that all of us have learned this information at different times, and be open to the possibility that what we might know to be true might be different now. And be open as we kind of explore what we share now as interpretive messaging. It's also important to remember that we're going to be interacting with a variety of different people. That means every single person that you meet at Tower Grove House needs something different from you in terms of what they understand or how they are learning. They might already have some background knowledge, and so you only need to provide another layer of something that they might be interested in. Or they may not know one thing at all about the garden, our mission, who our founder is, or any of that type of information. And so please be ready, prepared, and excited to kind of meet people where they are, and to be mindful of the fact that they are learning right along with us, and make sure that we're kind of tempering what we share with how people learn and what they're interested in. And so for those of you who are new to interpretation, you can see this wonderful definition up here that really encapsulates what interpretation is defined as. I think it is most interesting how Webster defines interpretation in a very general sense, and that it's the action of explaining the meaning of something. In both instances here, the key word is meaning. Information can be interesting, but not necessarily relatable to the people who are coming to visit us. They are seeing a big house that was owned by a wealthy man a very long time ago, and a lot of the elements that apply to what they're seeing at a very cursory level is not relatable at all to their life, to their interests, to their background. And so it is our job as interpreters in the space to really draw that connection, to provide those entry points for people to really have a moment to either think back and imagine what it would be like to live in St. Louis at that time, to take their life experience and compare it to the life of someone else. We often are having interactions with people in a very short amount of time. So we often find ourselves kind of grabbing them with something interesting. And we're very fortunate because the exhibits that are on display are truly I like to think of them as visual props. They're things that catch someone's eye that allow you to open a conversation. So if someone is saying, "Oh, I love that table. My grandmother had one like that in her house," you could easily interject and say, "Isn't that lovely? Henry Shaw bought this in 1859 to go in this house when he saw it in England." And there's always a story that comes next, or a way to tie what people are observing or commenting on or loving or not loving into something that you might know or understand from the resources that we've provided you. This is my favorite slide because this is the best comparative visual for what we're trying to do. We are trying to take something that someone already knows and add information, a learning moment, an idea, a spark to it to make something stick, to make them say, oh, I didn't know that, or, oh, I had one of these in my grandmother's house, but I never knew that this was this important, or what this did. You are this piece that's sticking that information together with something they've known before and something you're teaching them that's new. Even if it's something very small, you'd be surprised the types of impacts that we have as we share our interpretive information. Is everybody still with me? Yes? Everyone's still awake? I wouldn't know because I really can't see all your faces, so if you are sleeping, that's fine. Okay, so we're going to go here room by room and just kind of talk through what you might be seeing. In that interpretive guide, I've kind of divided it by the room. So in the larger document that you received, you're going to see that there are themed sections that kind of apply to each of the areas where you might be signing up to volunteer. Again, as I mentioned, our expectation isn't that you learn everything. Say you really love the parlor and you want to be there for the next 8 weeks. You could read the section about music and about food, and that's what you know, and share and love. And so that's how we've kind of organized that document that you're seeing. But the man here is oftentimes what we're sharing. Many of our visitors are unfamiliar or unacquainted with Henry Shaw, who is the founder of our garden. Mr. Shaw is a very interesting person, and his life really encapsulates the history of St. Louis, and that he moved to St. Louis when it was just a couple city blocks and saw it develop all the way to industrial railroad level city. And so because of that, he's a great backdrop for sharing the context of how St. Louis developed and how we have been a part of that community as the garden for such a long time. There is a timeline that's inside that cute little book I gave you. However, names and dates are important from a factual standpoint, but you will hear me say time and time again that the majority of the public does not know what a name or a date really means. Most people do not have a really strong concept of a timeline in their mind of, if I say 1823, that's not a connecting moment. I could say Henry Shaw here opened the garden in 1859. That's 1 year before the Civil War began. And now you have a connection point with some piece of history and a context moment that people might better understand. So knowing these things are important because people might ask you, when did Henry Shaw move to St. Louis? Or when did he build this house? And knowing some of those answers is helpful, but you don't have to be too tied to some of this. What's most important, or what I continue to try to share, are personality descriptors that really help people get to know who Mr. Shaw and other residents of the garden were. So in this instance, people want to know about why they don't know Mr. Shaw. They've lived in St. Louis their whole life. How do I not know who Mr. Shaw is? Because Mr. Shaw was a very private person and very good at not airing his business in the newspapers like many of his colleagues at the time. They see all of the buildings here and they want to know more about his legacy and how he designed these things. Really giving more emotional, connective descriptors help people better connect on a personality level with Mr. Shaw. I so frequently get asked about Mr. Shaw never being married. It's a very common question. I am able to explain more about how he was very focused on business. He was truly a visionary and was very, very focused on starting a business and then building a garden and doing all these other things, that he was essentially a workaholic. And people hear those words and say, oh, I know somebody who's like that, I'm like that, and feel a bit more of a connection. But because we're here to talk about Garden Glow, you will also note that the majority of the interpretive material that you've received there share a bit more about the holidays. This year's theme is called Passing Traditions. It focuses on the variety of traditions that we as 21st century celebrators still enjoy today that began or became popular in the Victorian time period. We are very fortunate that we have garden clubs from around St. Louis help us decorate the western part of the house. That's a tradition, no pun intended, that the house has continued for many years. And so you'll see that there is associated information with each room. Sometimes visitors do want to know who decorates. The eastern half of the house is decorated by staff and other volunteers, which is a wonderful way for us to also enjoy the holiday and contribute to what people are seeing. When a person enters the house, if you haven't been through our Glow experience recently, they will probably see a staff person outdoors who's helping kind of organize the line, make sure people are aware of the boundaries of the house, like we can't have strollers, they can't bring food or drink inside, and kind of managing what the expectation is from the outside. Another staff person is located at the front door and is welcoming them into our reception room. There's a one-way path that's very clearly marked with stanchions and other rugs, etc. But that staff person is really taking account of how many people come in and welcoming people with some very base information if they've never been to the house before. These are where you would find those staff people. If you show up for a shift and you're looking for them, you may be able to find one outside or one right at that front door. They would then enter our East Wing area. This is where our first volunteer shift is. This encompasses both the space that we use as a programming area. We have an ornament making activity where we encourage our younger visitors or older visitors alike to make ornaments with a prompt to give us their favorite traditions. So they might stop and make an ornament there and put it on one of our Christmas trees. And then head into our kitchen, which shares foodways from the 1900s. Our eastern half of the house was rebuilt in 1890, so a lot more of the interpretation that you'll see on that side of the house is closer to the 1900s, turn of the century. This volunteer spot is great if you love to talk about food, what people would have cooked, what people would have eaten for their holiday meals. There is a section in that interpretive plan that talks about foodways, what Henry Shaw might have been serving, and things of that nature. So if you like food, that's a good spot for you. Then you'll head upstairs here to the second floor east wing. This section of the house is the part that was newly renovated and opened this last year. It shares more about the Trelease family, who was our garden's first director. This is a really cool space. A lot of our visitors who only come once a year have not seen it renovated, which means you'll get a lot of oohs and ahs, which is very cool. Again, this side of the house is dated more to about 1900, but represents more of the experience that children would have had. You'll see a section in that interpretive plan about Santa, who kind of became more popular at the end of the 1800s as a figure of a Christmas celebration. And so that's a very cool space if you enjoy showing off new things and talking more about what a family would have been doing to celebrate their holiday. Now this hallway here is a common place that our second floor bedroom volunteer hang out in because this guest room and this room that is labeled for Henry Shaw are kind of tight, and so visitors kind of mosey in and out. So the volunteer is often located right here. It's decorated by our members board here at MVG, which is a really great opportunity. There's a section in that interpretive plan that talks about Christmas trees. So they kind of are focused on trees and the role that trees would play in a holiday. There's a plant profile about a Fraser fir in there, which is the most popular type of tree that is cultivated in the United States today, and is a really cool way to kind of give people a look at one of the most popular traditions that most people still carry on today, which is that beautiful tree decorating. Our guest bedroom is decorated this year by 2 volunteers. They do a wonderful job, and their inspiration come from Christmas cards. Christmas cards are a very cool holiday tradition that began right in the middle of the 1800s. And became a great alternative for people who were trying to send good tidings but didn't want to buy someone a gift. That weird in-between that we all feel, should we buy someone a gift, should we not? Christmas cards became a great replacement for that, and eventually became a place where artists were displaying their work and popularly distributing it. Most cards were meant to be decoration in a Victorian home. So if you received a card, you often put it on your tree or you put it out in your home to be a part of the decoration from year to year. So there's a great section in that interpretive plan about that. As well as the staples, there's a Wardian case in this room, which is a great opportunity to talk about how plants were transported during the 1800s. If you have want more information or want to know more about some of these elements because you really love these topics, please connect with me, and I've got plenty of info. Ladue Garden Club decorates Shaw's bedroom. They're focusing on holiday literature. Not until I was writing this interpretive plan did I really understand the importance of literature and how holidays have developed. Books and other writings like Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol really set the standard for what a holiday tradition is. The descriptions that people were seeing in books were what they were emulating, much like we see what's on TV or on the internet today. The books that people were holding on to as holiday favorites, many of which we still read today, are really what have created a lot of the traditions that we still celebrate today. So again, a great section about that in the interpretive plan. And so this room, it will still have a few of the regular elements. You get a lot of questions about the artwork that's on the wall of the beautiful Venetian lady. I have more information about her as well that I'll be distributing throughout this event if you want to know more. She is a lovely woman that many people want to be associated with Henry Shaw, but she is from the Renaissance period, so they are not acquainted. The next volunteer position kind of stands between our front parlor and our dining room. Our parlor will talk about music of the holidays, Christmas carols. A lot of our favorite Christmas carols that we still sing today were written in the Victorian time. A First Noel, Good King Wenceslas. The list really does go on and on. We were singing a lot of English carols until the Victorian time, when Christmas got really popular in America as a staple holiday, and so a lot of them were written in the Victorian time. So if you love music, a lot of people have questions about this piano here that's on the wall. It's a very unique piano. It's made from rosewood, so it has a great wood connection. Rosewood is a very endangered type of wood that can no longer be purchased because people in the Victorian time period loved it and over-harvested it. And so that is a great plant connection that we're able to share as people observe and admire some of the objects that we have on display. The Southwoods Garden Club decorates our dining room. They're going to be talking about sharing a holiday meal. So equal to those foodways would be just the tradition of having a meal, which really came out of that literature that we were talking about before. People got to know how important it was to sit down as industrialization was taking people to different corners. No longer did you live right next door to grandma and mom and brother and sister. People lived in different places, and that meal became that moment at a holiday to really connect, which I think is something that a lot of people today really still connect to. They're always trying to make it home for Christmas dinner. So those are all great talking points. This table will look very different than this. It will be set in a more traditional dinner type fashion, and have lots of cool fake food delectables on it that make people feel ready for dinner. The last shift that you're going to see is at our back door exit. This is located right in our informal dining room. The Herb Society decorates this space. They'll also be talking about those foodways that are focused on in that interpretive plan because they like to feature herbs and other things in alignment with what they love, which is great. And so this is a very, very important position. This person helps people find their way back to the glow path. It helps them figure out what they're doing next. It helps them figure out how to get out of the house, which at times is challenging for folks. This takes a more pleasantly assertive person to help direct traffic and make sure that people are moving the direction they need to move to be able to find their way back to the path. Again, this is located by a door, so you may be a little colder. A very cool thing about this position is that we have, I didn't bring it up here, a very cute little coloring book that we give away to children as their take home. This means you get to make a lot of people's day by giving them a cute little coloring take home. It's about Henry Shaw and his house on a winter day. It's very cute. And so this role has a few more operational things that we ask beyond kind of talking to people and making sure that people are prepared and ready to carry on with their glow experience. A lot of people do observe in the course of their visit that there is a western part of the house that is original and an eastern part of the house that was rebuilt in the year 1890 when our first director moved in. Unfortunately, Henry Shaw had been living in essentially an unrestored bachelor pad. So when Dr. Trelease and his family moved in after Mr. Shaw's passing, they realized they needed indoor plumbing to repair the space, to make sure running water could enter the home. And so they completely rebuilt that eastern half of the house. So people are able to very clearly notice because of the architectural features that are very different. But now that exhibit that we just redid on the second floor more clearly gives them a better understanding of what that change looked like through exhibit panels that are on the wall. But oftentimes people don't want to read, they want to talk to you about it. So being aware that at times a lot of the questions you'll get are about how the house has changed, how things look different from one side to another, and kind of contextualizing that for people is really helpful. We also have quite a few visitors that are younger. We try to encourage open-ended questions that help younger visitors kind of unpack what they're seeing. Asking questions like, have you ever visited a house like this? Or do you see anything that you like? Do you see anything that is similar to your house? And making compare and contrast statements to kind of lead them to do some more thoughtful observation. We ask them questions about is there a room in the house that's missing? If they're on the western half of the house, they might notice that there isn't a bathroom, and talking about what the difference between Mr. Shaw going to the bathroom is and that. I mean, very basic life needs that kids are in touch with. They're in a very big space, and so we also try to be mindful of their needs. I also try to, as you work the system and get to be familiar with the house, you'll also be more familiar with where kind of the quick exit spots are. If you have a little one who's having a meltdown or needs to get out for some reason, you will come to find where the quick exit areas are that can easily get them to an exit so they're not trapped. There are a lot of people, so please be mindful of how people are experiencing the space. We have had situations where we've had to help people get out because of claustrophobia or other things, so it is always helpful for you to be mindful of what you're observing and be as helpful as you can be if they need support. Now I'm going to go through a couple of these commonly asked questions to help you feel maybe a little bit more familiar with what we do and what we do talk about often, and ways that you might, questions you might get that might kind of throw you off kilter or might be more difficult to answer. So we'll go through a few of these, and then it'll be time for you to ask me questions, and you can stop listening to me talk. So a lot of our visitors are seeing something very grand in front of them, and they want to know how Henry Shaw made his money. What is the secret? This is a very simple question. There's kind of two ways you could answer it. A very simple answer would say he made his money in hardware, and that might suffice for some people. A really great interpretive answer that leaves people kind of learning more or wanting to know more about the story tells the story about how Henry Shaw moved to the United States with his father when he was just 19 years old, brought a shipment of goods from his home in Sheffield, England, with the intention to sell them, but lost them along the way, and then had to go searching for them all the way around the eastern seaboard of the United States. Making it to New Orleans, he sailed up the Mississippi on one of the first steamboats to St. Louis, looked around and said, "This looks like a good place to sell my stuff," and ended up staying here for the rest of his life. There's a lot of elements in that story that people are awed by. It's hard to imagine as a 19-year-old person that you set out on your own to do that kind of salesmanship, but at the same time, St. Louis had a lot of opportunities. This is a great question to help you contextualize what St. Louis looked like when Henry Shaw first moved here. It was a couple city blocks. There were very few people who lived here other than businessmen, fur trappers, things of that nature. And Henry Shaw was among those that helped St. Louis become a bona fide city. By the 1850s, we would be the second largest immigrant city in the United States. By the 1880s, we would be one of the largest industrial cities in terms of factory and economic work in this country as well. So Henry Shaw really did see it all, and it all started with this great little steamboat. A lot of people want to know, was Henry Shaw ever married? We touched on this earlier, but a lot of people want to know if he was married. Again, not because people necessarily want to know the dirt, but I think it comes from more wanting to be relational with Mr. Shaw. They want to know, okay, being married is a common thing that spans over time. That's a overarching theme and cultural tradition, and they want to know if they relate to Mr. Shaw in that way. Mr. Shaw was never married. When you share that information, you often get a lot of people saying, "Oh, it makes sense why he has so much money," making jokes. But it's also a great opportunity to contextualize that the system that Mr. Shaw grew up in, being an upper middle class person, and living in a city that was only a few city blocks, did not leave him a lot of opportunity. And while his family tried to marry him off multiple times, he was very focused. That drive to create a legacy was his primary focus. And so there are notations here or there of going to dinner with this woman or this woman, but nothing that really provides us any real understanding. I think the most extraordinary thing that people have a hard time or are surprised to learn is how Mr. Shaw kept all that information private. Because in a world of Facebook and Instagram, the thought of keeping your private life secret seems impossible. And so a lot of people relate to this in that they have a want or a wish that their life wasn't public. And Mr. Shaw figured out how to do that. This is very timely because we did just celebrate the Halloween season. And I have to share this because we firstly take what we do very seriously as interpreters. I would say a fair amount of people ask this question, or want to know more about this topic. We indulge it a little bit at the holiday or at the Halloween season, but for the most part, I discourage our interpreters from sharing any type of information that encourages this, primarily because our focus and intention is to share quality, well-researched, historic information. Regardless of personal belief, this is not something that can be verified or proven by science, and because of that, we try to make sure that our interpretation is accessible to all people. It breaks my heart when I have people who say, I don't want to go in there because I've heard, and I don't like that. A lot of our visitors, as many that do find that topic interesting, as many are, I don't want to say afraid, but uncomfortable with that idea. Additionally, all children in the 21st century seem to think that old things are haunted, which is not true and can be a huge impetus to teaching really quality history, and kind of takes that opportunity off the table because it is a distraction. So I would ask you to please be mindful if people ask you this question, to answer. If they looked it up on the internet, they could do their own research, and that's often what I share with people. But to be very mindful, if you encourage this even in a funny way, you could be causing someone behind them, around them, within earshot to be uncomfortable, and that's the last thing that we want to do. I also want to address this topic because not only is it important, but it is something that people have strong feelings about or can come to you with in a more emotional way. So I do want to have this conversation with you briefly. I will tell you that the current place that this type of topic, among the other individuals who worked at the garden, is located in our basement. There is an exhibit that's in the process of being updated, upgraded, improved. The basement will be open, but is not a volunteer spot this year. We're mindfully trying to figure out how to give people access to that exhibit, but also acknowledging that there are some operational issues with people going up and down the stairs at the same time, which causes some traffic issues. We don't want to close the experience to people, but we're trying to figure out the best way for that situation to come together. So please be patient. We're all learning and trying to figure out what works best. However, regardless, you might get visitors who want to know more about this topic. Henry Shaw, again, living and growing and thriving in St. Louis in the early 1850s. He was a part of a community that was struggling with understanding and engaging with the institution of slavery. We have some documentation from when Henry Shaw first moved to St. Louis, where he wrote to family members and said, I don't really know about this slavery thing. I don't really know how this works in America or what this is going to do for us. But unfortunately, by the 1840s, Henry Shaw owned 11 people, which means that at some point he saw the value in participating in that system. We know very little about these individuals because our only record as an institution is through tax records. So we have a few names, but nothing that tells us more about the types of work that they did, how they participated. We have no record at all that they lived on garden grounds. It's possible that they only lived at his townhome in the city. It's very likely that because of the types of skilled labor that St. Louis was looking for, that these individuals would have been in a type of rental system where someone needed, excuse me, laundry done, and so they would have gone to so-and-so's house on Tuesday and so-and-so's house on Wednesday. and Henry Shaw would have acquired income from that. Regardless of the type of activities that were being done, regardless of the attitude or the way that Henry Shaw felt, I try to present this topic to our visitors in a very straightforward way. Any person who owns another person is wrong, and it's not okay. A lot of our visitors want to make an excuse. They want to say, oh, but he gave us all of these great things. He did all these wonderful things. And our job as historians and as interpreters are to provide the context to help people better understand what that system looked like, but also come to terms with the fact that it's still an ugly piece of our history that we're trying to better understand. In this situation, it's very challenging, again, because we don't have a lot of primary resources about the roles that these individuals were playing, either at the garden or for Mr. Shaw. But I would continue to encourage any visitor who wants to engage about this to receive the base information that we do have. I can provide other information if you want to know more about this in a more written format to kind of help you share. But I want you all to be as prepared as possible that people will be emotional about this topic, and that's okay. Emotion means that people care in one way or another. And even if that emotion is anger, disdain, our job is to provide them as much factual information as possible and let them have their emotions about it. For those people who have not been in the house for a while, again, we have quite a few changing exhibits. You're going to hear a lot of people say, this is never open. And that's a great opportunity to say, well, you know what? Actually, we're open April through December, Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 4. So knowing some of that operational information to encourage people to come back. Being able to say that exhibits do change all the time. We present new topics every year, both for this time of year during Garden Glow, but during the rest of the year. We have daily programs like story time every day at 11. If you love to tell a little story to those kiddos, nothing's better than gathering them around. We have a great story time. We always have activity sheets that are seasonal that help people go back out into the garden and explore on their own. We also do a lot of research about the artifacts throughout the year that we continue to share through our interpretation, through our volunteers. This is also a great time for me to plug that if you fall in love with what you're doing now, during this 8 weeks, we always have room for volunteer interpreters during the rest of the year. So that would be something you could contact me about. Try this. This is a good trial period to hop on for the rest of the season. And now I have talked for over an hour, and it is time for you to ask questions if you have any. That's an interesting question. I do not have any primary resources that tell me that's the case, but that doesn't mean that's not possible. Yes, ma'am. It is not. That's a good question. I would have to go back to some resources to answer that question. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. Right. I don't know that either. I have quite a few newspaper articles that case that Betty's talking about. Henry Shaw was sued right before he was set to open the garden by a woman who said that he offered her a piano as a promise of marriage, and then he took it back, and she took him to court and won over $100,000, which was half of his wealth at that time. I can't say for certain what the final fate of that piano is. Yeah, you check in with me. I can't say for certain if he received that item back or not, because the court case took at least a year, if not more, to work out. Right. Okay. I've never heard 13 as the number. I've heard 7, which would be the languages that, a lot of those languages, he probably would have had a base level from schooling, but then moving to St. Louis, he would have encountered French, Spanish. He spoke English already, even Dutch. Native people, because he was in the trade business, he was trading with all types of people and probably honing those language skills through that process. I know Latin doesn't count as a spoken language, but is a written language. And so I've heard that included in that number as well. Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, that's true. A good place to look at that would be in the Tower Grove House book. There's like a little book that we give away if people make a donation. It's a cute little book. I can make those available to whomever would like one if you don't have a copy. Yeah, because I know that there's some of those logistics in that book, but if we can't find it there, I bet we can find it someplace else.
All right, I'll check.
Great. Yes. That's a good question. They took it all the way down to the foundation. Yes, yes. And what's amazing, we have some wonderful images that are a part of the exhibit that's hanging on the wall. Because they took it down May or June of 1889, 1890. And by September, the walls were already, like, there's a whole structure already rebuilt, which is, that really speaks to the power of immigrant labor. Labor was cheap. Brick, we were the mecca of brick, so to speak, and so the turnover was like a whole year, and they completely had a new. Yes. So it would look moderately different. I wish I had a comparative picture. So the original structure, the eastern part of the house would have been a servant's quarters, that Henry Shaw would have had house help living within. That would have been most likely immigrant girls, young girls, who would have done cooking, cleaning, and care of the home and his needs. They would have completely demolished that, and when they rebuilt it, they chose an architect named Joseph Given, who was quite talented at plumbing, which seems like a strange thing for an architect to be good at, but he knew how to bring running water into a home, and so they chose him specifically. They expanded it to look a bit more symmetrical, because originally that original servants' quarters was moderately smaller, shorter roofs, dormitory style, no bells and whistles, and clearly from the exterior making a statement about where the wealthy person of the home lived and where the help lived. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Yes. Right now I am under the impression it's a parking lot. It was at the corner of 7th and Locust downtown. I'm told a Macy's building used to sit there. But now, if you drove there today, I'm fairly certain it's a parking lot. Yes, Barb. The original kitchen would have been outside. It would have been called a summer kitchen, because for the majority of Henry Shaw's life, they probably would have been cooking with something that's more of a hearth with an open flame. And if you're cooking with an open flame, doing that inside the house that you're living in isn't always a great idea. So if you have the ability to put it elsewhere outside of your home, that's a lot safer in terms of fire hazard. But we don't know exactly where that would have been located. We don't have the early maps that we have of the garden focus more on planting, of course. The blueprints that we had for Tower Grove House were lost in a fire at the turn of the century. George Barnett's office would eventually burn, and our blueprints were inside of it. So we do not have the original intentions for the home that might have had a better outline of those types of things. Mm-mm. Not that I'm aware of, no. Yes, yes. Yes, Dr. Drulese is a very interesting man. I have plenty of information I could also pass along to you if you have more interest in him. He came to botany in a very wonderful and connective way. He essentially was just an outdoor kid that grew up outside. He grew up in New York, hunting, fishing, and through that process learned to collect whatever he was doing outside. He went to Cornell University and then would eventually come to teach first at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, which is where he would meet his wife, Julia. They would marry, and then his graduate work had been at Harvard, which is where he would have met a man named Dr. Asa Gray, who would become a friend of Henry Shaw's as Henry Shaw built the garden. And in a very Willy Wonka-esque kind of way, Asa Gray said, "Hey, I know this young guy over here." Henry Shaw would meet Dr. Trelease and get to know him, and then eventually decide that he would be the head of the Department of Botany at Washington University. But then after getting to know him would say, the head of that department will also be the director of the garden when I'm gone. So yes, he is a trained botanist. Through the course of his life, he would identify and name over 2,500 species. He did quite a bit of traveling and work out in the field. He was on the Harriman expedition in Alaska with people like John Muir. He would do a lot of genetics work in the Azores. He became a very well-respected botanist through the course of his life and would go on to the University of Illinois after this position and continue that work. Yes? It is not, no. So the townhouse now, a lot of visitors will ask that same question, our offices. And so our president has his office there and other departments of that nature. So no, it is never open to the public. No, no. Any other questions? Carol? Yes? Not that I'm aware of. No. It does now, but no, not that I'm aware of. It would have been 17 rooms. It had 2 kitchens, but I'm not remembering anything about running water. But that's something I could check in on. That's a good question, but it would have been downtown. So downtown would have been using an outhouse system that would have flowed into a rudimentary sewer system that would eventually become a problem in terms of health codes, et cetera, that we would update closer to the turn of the century. And by that time, it would have moved out here to the garden. That's a good question. Yes, Jeanette? That's a good question. We don't know exactly his comings and goings. I'm sure we could track them in a journal if we needed to. I think initially the intention was for it to be a summer home because it's more quaint and easy to access. I would say that later in his life he spent more time at Tower Grove House in all seasons. It's designed to have a fireplace in every room, so in theory you can be there in the wintertime. Some summer homes are designed without fireplace with the intention that it's just summer. So that tells me at some point the intention was to be there all year round. I find it to be more of a, Tower Grove House this was his place, and as he got older, this was the place he wanted to be. As he got older as well, the ability to traverse roads to get here were better. So when he first built the garden, I'm not even certain how developed Kings Highway was, as I think about it. So, in those 40 years between when he built the house in 1849 and his passing, the road system, St. Louis was moving this direction. And so having roads in bad weather makes a difference. You can't be trapped here without food or water. So those types of logistics, I think, would make a difference. But by 1889, he surely would have had roads and the ability for things to get here much easier than when he first designed it. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I It's very difficult to discern operationally the role of any person who is employed or considered the help throughout history. The combination of like we have listings of planting seeds that Henry bought for food that they would grow here to eat out in the garden behind the house. But he signed that receipt. I don't know who put it. It's in his handwriting, so I can take from that he put it together. But did she go about the acquiring, pickup, delivery, mandating who was planting, all of that stuff? Unfortunately, history is not as kind to the people who were doing the labor. And because of that, I really can't say with any type of confidence. I from a few primary sources understand that Mrs. Edom, who was Henry Shaw's primary housekeeper, did the majority of the management of the home. But what exactly that is, I can't really say with confidence. But it kept running, so someone was doing it. That's a good question. Does anybody? Yes, sir, in the front. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So Henry Shaw sold the majority of his slaves in 1858. He was out of the slave business before the Civil War because, unfortunately, they had been, or maybe fortunately, they had a good majority of them had run away, and he'd been going through the process of hiring people to track them down and then capturing them and selling them. So he had eliminated himself from that business for other reasons. The Civil War, I think, is as complicated as it was for any other person in a city like St. Louis. I mean, St. Louis was very divided. As a slaveholder, he knew a fair amount of people who were Southern sympathizers, but he also knew quite a few people who were Northern sympathizers. One of the people that we talk most about having visited in his guest book was Ulysses S. Grant and his family, Julia Dent, his wife, and the Dent family. Her parents were Southern sympathizers and slave owners, but Grant himself was doing other things for our country at that time. So again, this is where that descriptor of Henry as being a private person comes into play. We have guest books that recognize that he offered dinner and had meals and hosted people with sympathies for both sides. And we have no clear identification of what that actually looked like for him in terms of his belief system. I have heard through oral tradition, or I've heard people say before that the garden would have been on the short list of places that a battle could have happened because we already had some semblance of a fence wall system by the middle of the 1860s. So I've heard people say that before, but again, I don't have any primary sources that tell me exactly what his belief systems were, or what he was thinking about at that time. Other questions? Thoughts? This is very exciting. I do have one new thing to share that I didn't put a slide in here about, but I don't want to cause anyone to be surprised. We are very fortunate. This year we're trying something new. I know, come with me on this journey. We're trying something new. And the projection mapping that was used during the summer experience, we're going to transition to some holiday stuff with some beautiful music and designs that'll be projected on the front of Tower Grove House. That impacts nothing that we do inside or anything of that nature. I just wanted to share that with you so that no one is surprised when they come upon the house the first night and see beautiful things projected on the front of the house. Again, we've never tried this, so we're going to see how it goes, if it adds to the experience, what our visitors have to say about it, because ultimately they decide what works and what doesn't. But I wanted to share that with you as the most exciting thing about this event. I'm really looking forward to this year. Additionally, if you weren't aware, the Gardenland Express train show here in this building is also themed Victorian Christmas. Yay! So the Victorian Christmas is all around this year. If you have interest in volunteering in that space, I'm sure my friend Andrea Harper can also help you if you want to talk about Victorian Christmas with some trains as well. But again, please do not hesitate if you have other questions, thoughts, my email, my phone number. Please look for an email in the next few days. You will see that interpretive plan and all that material that you got in digital form, and you'll also see a link to a recording of this presentation if you want to go back and listen to my terrible sick voice for a second time, or if you have friends that are interested in participating but weren't able to make it today. Otherwise, yes. I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question. Maybe. Right. Let me see what kind of technology magic I can make happen. Okay, great. Thank you, guys.